or you clicked on the video. We appreciate you. Thank you so much. But now I need you to hit that subscribe button, and I need you to ring that bell so you can get notifications for when we post videos. And I need you to smash that like button. Clearly, I got way too animated, but I need you to smash that like button so we can see how far we can really take this video. We appreciate you. Enjoy the content. All right. Yeah, let's jump into the fucking Irishman. Yeah, this is a film that we've been waiting for quite some time. From Martin Scorsese, and it was kind of controversial in that it for a number of different reasons, but one of the reasons why it was controversial was because it was a film that was one of the most, if not perhaps the most important film coming out specifically on Netflix.
Yeah.
That how many times do you get such a high profile director such as Martin Scorsese working with Netflix, because it lends to the credibility that is Netflix, right?
Yeah.
Like we look at Netflix as like the stepchild to any other sort of platform or whatever as far as like TV or film goes, but this is as characters in Martin Scorsese's film would say, this is a big fuck you to everybody else.
It's going to be hard for Steven Spielberg to say this is not film.
It's not
right?
film. I mean, it's cool,
so
but it's not
I'm going to give you the quick synopsis of
Sure.
The Irishman. So Frank, the Irishman Sheeran, is a man with a lot on his mind. The former labor union high official and hitman learned to kill serving in Italy during the Second World War. He now looks back on his life and his hits that define his mob career, maintaining connections with the Buffalino crime family, in particular the part he claims to have played in the disappearance of his lifelong friend Jimmy Hoffa, the former president of the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, who mysteriously vanished in the late July 1975 at the age of 62. So again, this movie is really focusing on, it's being told from the perspective of Frank Sheeran, who is the Irishman.
Yeah. Yeah, so we have, of course, the film directed by Martin Scorsese and written by Charles Brandt, who actually wrote the book that this is based off of, which is I Heard You Paint Houses. And then the screenplay was written by Steven Zillian. Okay, so let's just jump into the plot. What do we think about the plot of the film?
So what I love most about this film is its intent on being accurate with all of the characters throughout the film, right?
Yeah.
So making sure that the names were correct, the relationships were correct, the families were correct. Throughout the film, you'll see that at certain moments when certain characters are introduced, they'll stop, they'll do like a freeze frame, and they'll give you the name of the character, the AKA, they'll tell you about how, where, and when they died, which continues to build in accuracy and realism into the film. Like, these were real people who did real things, who really, a lot of these people, they may have said this character died in whatever city, got shot 7 times in the head, right?
Yeah.
Like, certain things like that continues as a viewer to reinforce, like, hey, this is real shit, right? I love the perspective it's told from Frank Sheeran's perspective. It does for me what I think, like, when I look at a film like Endgame did, right? Or Infinity War, right? You have a villain, someone who's a bad person who you really, really, not even as the movie ends, but like in the first half of the movie, as the movie gets to the middle of the movie, like, you really grow to like this guy, even though he's a terrible person. What we saw with Thanos, we see this here with Robert De Niro as Frank Sheeran. Great story, true story, as much as true as it possibly could be, in characters that you really grow to like.
So I think that this movie was kind of unique in that it tells, mainly speaking, this film is about Jimmy Hoffa, right? The disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa and all that entails. That's like that's like your A storyline, right?
Yeah.
But what's unique about the film is, I think it's about so much more than that. And it's about friendship. It's about loyalty. But then even more than that, it's about family. That I found one of the most unique storylines was sort of the one that was just, it buzzed through the entire film, was the relationship between Frank Sheeran and his daughter, who was eventually played by and it goes between, like, obviously she's young and then she's old, but his daughter's name Peggy in the film, and I thought that as soon as I saw that sort of storyline building, I was like, oh, this is going to be one of the main tentpoles of this film. And it sure as fuck was. It stayed with the film right up until the very end, which I thought was it was very subtle, but also in your face. That they made it a very unique part of the film. I thought that the way that Scorsese built that into the context of the film was phenomenal. And he does that with a lot of the different storylines that we deal with in the film, such as like the friendship between Frank and Jimmy, right? The friendship between Frank and Russell, right? Yeah. Those are all, and you knew from kind of the beginning that it was going to kind of like he was going to be pulled in polar directions. And as you're watching it unfold, you're like, fuck, these are tough decisions that he's going to have to end up making. So Scorsese just flexes his muscles as far as like, and I don't know, he had the whole recent thing with like fucking, talking about Marvel films, that those aren't films, yada, yada. That's how great this movie was, is that even with all that, you simply cannot deny this is a fucking fantastic film.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But yeah, I do like the fact that you called out the themes in this movie, like loyalty and friendship and family. Those things were all very important, and continually reinforced throughout, the course of this film.
Yeah.
Despite, his daughter's, Frank's daughter's Peggy's dislike for, for Joe Pesci's character Russell. Russell still continued to say, hey, you know what, she's a child, family is the most important thing, she's your daughter, I will show her that same respect. Like little details like that, right? Like you may not always like the different members of your family.
And it was continuous too.
Yeah.
Was it that was what was
it was from the time she was a child to where she was a grown woman.
Yeah.
But like you may not always like the different members of your family, but like family is family, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's the point Russell was making. He made several times throughout this film.
Yeah.
So to me, that was like outstanding, but like an underlying message.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'd be remiss if we didn't mention the runtime for this film. This was not a film that you want to watch when you have to go to work. In
if you've got somewhere to go.
Yeah. If you got work in a couple hours, or generally speaking, if you just don't do well with long movies, clearly this is not going to sit well with you at a 3 hour 29-minute mark.
Yeah.
This is a long fucking movie.
If it's a first date, if it's your first time hanging out with this young lady or this young man,
that's a lot of time.
Yeah. This is not how you want to spend your time with her.
Probably
if you're going through a divorce, maybe you watch this movie.
No, maybe you don't. Trapped in the fucking house for 3 hours.
Let's not talk for a while.
Very true. Very true. Okay. Now let's move to the performances in the film. There's so much you can say about all of the people starring in this film, but we can credit the. I'm trying to do the casting by credit here. Casting by credit goes to Ellen Lewis. Let's talk about some of the performances, who we liked, who we didn't like, what was going on. I'm going to go first. I always give my runners up and then I give my MVP. I don't think I can do that today.
It's difficult. It's very difficult.
I don't think I can do that today because there's a reason why there was such a big deal made about all three of these main characters. We're talking about Pesci, Pacino, as well as De Niro, all getting together one last time to do this film under the tutelage of Scorsese. They demonstrated why all of them have been at the top of their field for so many years. Watching this movie, even with the facial recognition thing, which we'll talk about a little bit when we get to cinematography, but even with that, their performances were historic. Joe Pesci murdered. literally he murdered, but also figuratively in terms of his performance. It was one of the most incredible performances I've seen anybody give ever. It was just so subtle, but at the same time so believable. At the same time, he was likable, but he was kind of an asshole. Mm-hmm. But the lines that he was able to sort of dribble through, weave in and out of, were amazing. But everybody did that. Pacino, amazing performance.
Oh my gosh.
Amazing performance. De Niro, completely amazing and believable.
Yeah, you know it's funny as you're talking, right? Like when you started with Pesci, I'm like, yeah, Pesci, he definitely
then you jumped
killed it,
Pacino, like,
and then you say Pacino, and I was like, oh man, he was so good as Jimmy Hoffa, and then you go to De Niro, I'm like, he carried this movie through. Obviously, he is being told from his perspective. He's doing a lot of the narrating and storytelling, but it's like, fuck, which guy do you go with? But again, I just want to call that out, but I want you to continue.
Yeah. So it's hard for me to give an MVP to anybody or to say anybody's a runner up to anybody else. I think all of them deserve it. And then not to even mention Harvey Keitel, who played Angelo Bruno in the film, as well as Ray Romano. Oh
Ray
my
Romano.
Just the list of actors that were in this film. Bobby Cannavale, who he's in one of the series I love. He or at least previously he was in Mr. Robot in season 3. Broadway actor, a great guy. He's been in a number of things recently, as well as I think he actually worked with Scorsese on Scorsese's a short-lived project with HBO. I forget what it was called, but it was about like the record industry and all that. But anyways, all of them gave such great performances. But then when I think about that, I think I have to give my hat off to Scorsese. Again, say whatever the fuck you will about whatever his comments were about the Marvel shit. He simply is a master director, meaning that the reason why we're able to say, oh my God, these guys gave such great performances,
it's because of their direction.
That's right. How else are you going to coordinate all that? Like, not everybody walked on set that day and was like, I'm going to give him my A performance today. No, you have to mine that out of people, and you have to get that out of people, so it speaks to the master that is Scorsese, that he was able to mine those performances and put people in the exact, like, Pacino as Hoffa, perfect. Mm-hmm. That was perfect casting, and especially if that was sometimes you can look at a character and you can be like, maybe if they had somebody else playing that character, I would believe this more, or maybe we love this actor or actress, but we didn't like the role that they played. We thought they gave a great performance, but the movie that surrounded them was terrible. With this, there's no discussion that there's a seamless interaction between the story as well as the people playing the characters in the story. So
so to be honest, like, there's nothing that you have said that I also don't mimic, and it's hard for me to choose who is the MVP of this movie, right? There are the names that I don't even really need to say. Joe Pesci was amazing in this film. He managed to play, I would say, like, he was kind of like the thread that from the beginning of the movie through the end of the movie, he was like that thread that continued through, which he bridged a lot of the characters together. He was the guy, right? Russell was the guy, right? His character never stood, he was never too big, he was never too small. He was just pitch perfect.
Yeah.
The story was being told from Frank Sheeran's perspective, so De Niro was like the narrator of the story, right? The story was being told by him, about him, so on and so on.
Yeah.
Al Pacino as Jimmy Hoffa, he was big, he was bold, he was loud, right? And that's who Jimmy Hoffa was. Excellent. Who of those three guys is the MVP? If you ask me to pick, I'm just going to tell you I'm not going to, because
I abstain.
How could you, right?
Yeah.
How do you? So what I'm going to do really quickly is I'm going to tell you who I really loved in this movie. I do think Ray Romano was fantastic.
Great.
Because at no point in time when you're watching this particular movie do you think of everybody loves Raymond. At no point in time do you think of that, because he does so well. He completely removes himself from that, and he plays the Bill Buffalino so well. Stephen Graham, who plays Anthony
Tony
Provenzano, or Tony Pro, fantastic. I mean, he stood side by side with Joe Pesci, with Frank Sheeran, or Robert De Niro as Frank Sheeran, and particularly his beef and his conversations with Al Pacino as Jimmy Hoffa. He stood side by side with those legendary actors and held his own, right? From an acting perspective, his delivery as Tony Pro was just spot on. I loved his character. I think young Peggy, in being able to show, as such a young actress, right? And young Peggy was played by Lucy Galena. Being able to show emotion, but like underlying emotion, right? Subtle emotion of like, when you're uncomfortable, when someone makes you feel uncomfortable, right? Being able to display that on film is difficult, because you don't do it through facial expressions, right? You don't do it through words. A lot of times you do it through body language. You do it through your eyes. And I think she, for a young actress, did that so well. You can tell throughout the entire movie, something about Joe Pesci as Russell made her uncomfortable.
Something about Sheeran himself made her uncomfortable.
Yeah. Even her own father made her uncomfortable, because it's like she knew who he really was, right? All the other daughters, you have this like unconditional love for your parents, right? But she knows that like, my father's not a good man, and you can see that through this entire film, from young Peggy, again played by Lucy Galena, to older Peggy, played by Annie Paquin, who we know as Rogue from X-Men, right?
Anna Paquin, yeah. A quick note on her. A lot of people say, there's a lot of talk that, especially like they talk about the women's roles in Scorsese's films, that he's a little sexist because he doesn't really give significant roles to women. I think it's one of those things where you can make an argument for that, and I can see that, and in some parts I can agree with that. In this, her specific role was very important, and it was very important that she wasn't a very vocal character, because she was the silent judgment that was the audience for the film, right?
Yeah.
So she was the conduit for the audience, whereas, okay, sure, there's this guy Frank who we see as our protagonist, but is doing very fucked up things that we're just co-signing with, right? But her character, Anna Paquin's character, is that silent judgment of, but I know you. They might agree with you as in the audience. They might be like, hey, this is our protagonist, but I'm the person who knows what you're doing is fucked up, and I'm going to hold you accountable.
Yeah.
Right.
And you really get to step into her perspective, or her frame of thought. Like during that first scene is when Frank Sheeran comes home, and he hears that his daughter's been shoved or pushed at the grocery store, and he walks her down
and beats the shit
she has
out
to
of her.
she watches her father beat the shit out of some guy, which that was my least favorite scene in the movie, because I'm sorry, but De Niro, you cannot sell.
No. Okay, but here's I had that same thought, but then I thought, oh, but what if that's true? But what if that's actually how Sheeran moved?
Yeah, but I mean, the stepping on the hand and like the cry, none of it sold really. Like that is the scene was when I was watching this movie. I was like, okay,
showing your age here a little.
Yeah, I told Fabe this. I was like, no more action or fight scenes from De Niro.
I don't think he wants any.
Yeah, after this we're done. And I just barely allowed that scene. But But yeah, so again, that's the scene where we really get to like kind of see things from her eyes, where she's like, my father is not a good man, and then that tracks throughout the whole movie. But the person I got to give the biggest hand clap to is going to be Sebastian Maniscalco. So he is a stand-up comedian, right? Actor, but he is a stand-up comedian.
What'd you say his name was?
Sebastian.
I know who you're talking about.
Maniscalco.
Oh yeah. I don't know why when you said
so
it.
So in this movie, he plays Joseph Gallo, or Crazy Joey, right? I mean, if you watch his stand-up specials, this guy's Italian to the fucking core, right? He makes he's not apologetic for it at all. I'm I mean, your old school Italian guy, right?
Yeah.
Beginning of the day to the end of the day. So I think he was great in casting this movie for realism. Like, this is who he really is, right?
Yeah.
He's able to pull off the character, his face, his look, his mannerisms, his accent. He's able to pull off the character. But though Sebastian is a stand-up comedian by trade, he's also a really good actor. And to your point, Martin Scorsese, why he's such a great director, is he's able to mine out whatever it is in you that he needs in order for you to bring this character to life, and he does that with Sebastian. So I think if I were to give any hand clap to any actor in this film, it would be him as Crazy Joey.
Yeah. Just I think you can't say enough about everybody who acted in this film. Very, very well acted film. But again, like you just said, I think you do have to give you have to tip your cap to Scorsese, because I don't think any of that happens without his. Like, if you had any other director directing this, you'll get a very drastic different performance from the cast.
Yeah.
Let's jump into cinematography. So the cinematographer for the film was Rodrigo Pietro. So the cinematography for this film, I thought, was just gorgeous. It was the ambiance of the film was perfect. The color grading was perfect in terms of capturing exactly sort of, I think, the feel that you should feel when you're watching this film. That it's a dark, sinister kind of movie, but it doesn't present itself as such. It presents the film as like, oh, here we're just telling a story about this guy. But it's when you look at the actual individual, like, so for instance, like, just even how De Niro shoots people in the film. It's just like, this is dark, dude.
Yeah.
Like, he just walks by, boom, 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 and then it's done. Like, and he doesn't have remorse. He doesn't care. Like, he's just, it is what it is, you know?
I paint houses.
Exactly. You know, and that was actually a great scene, by the way. A side note, like, he's like, you know, he's like, I heard you paint houses. And he's like, yeah, I do carpentry as well. Like, yeah. It's a great line. Yeah, I think that the cinematography of the film was really great. It was really spot on. But there were a couple of choices as far as, like, so for instance, in the film, we got a couple of the times where we get the classic Scorsese one shot or tracking shot where we just follow a character or people through a particular scene, and we're just like, you know, like we did like the classic one from Goodfellas, you know, in terms of the restaurant scene. Like, I remember towards the beginning, there was a shot where we follow, it was like a hit that was being done, and the camera just stays with, and we follow a couple different characters, but it never breaks the stride, from the scene, and it's actually short, you know, it's not that long, but it's a shorter scene. But those choices are like clearly like classic Scorsese. And we're going to talk about the soundtrack here or the score for the film here in a moment. But I think the relationship between the score, and this is something that I noticed specifically about Scorsese films, the relationship between the score and the film, impeccable. Always. It's always. If you watch any Scorsese film, pay attention to the relationship of music and what he's showing you on the screen.
Yeah. It's hard to divorce one from the other.
It
right?
really is.
It's like thinking about color without shape or shape without color. Like, you can't think of, like, if you're in your mind right now, picture the color red.
Well, yeah, you've been through this example.
Yeah. What shape is it? It's usually in the shape of like a ball or a square or something like that, right? That's what Martin Scorsese is able to accomplish. Yeah. Sometimes the score stands out more than the movie, and sometimes the movie, it's like, you know, the music didn't really do anything for it at all. With his films, they're like one and the same.
Yeah. So anyway, so that's pretty much all I had to say about.
For me, cinematography, I mean, it was excellent because it really felt like you're just following a person's story throughout, you know, a day, a week, throughout, you know, a series of events in their life. The opening scene to me, where you're coming down the hallway of that like old person's home, right? And then you could tell it's just like, you know, person carrying a camera walking through the halls, right? And then throughout it'll pan to the left, it'll pan to the right as like different people are moving throughout the hall, and then you would get to Robert De Niro's character sitting in the chair telling the story. To me, that felt like to me, that really painted a picture of like, all right, you're hearing a story from someone's perspective. It was as if you were a journalist and you were walking into the old person's home to sit with a guy who had a story to tell.
Yeah,
and then the story's being told.
So like this guy Charles Brandt, who wrote the book I Heard You Paint Houses, it was as if you're him. Like, because his whole thing was he's, I think, sat with Frank Sheeran before he passed away, and it wasn't until he passed that I think he released, the book, or I don't know if he released a book or notes or whatever the case is, but I think that's what the whole idea of that was essentially just following him around, or you're him in that case. That's why it feels like you're a person when you're watching that opening sequence.
Yeah. And I mean, but like to bring that to life, you have to do it a certain way, right? If you want to visually put me in the frame of mind of like, I'm watching a story, or I'm here, or I'm listening to a story being told and I'm watching it, you put me in that frame of mind by how you open me up to this story, right? Mm-hmm. I think that first scene does it so well. Like, you feel like you're walking through the hall of this, senior citizen's home, right? You feel like you're going to sit with Frank Sheeran, and you feel like you're going to listen to his story. And then the rest of the movie is like as if you're sitting with him and he's telling you all these events that occurred.
Yeah. I don't think you can. Yeah, Scorsese, he's just a master filmmaker, dude. I don't think it gets much better than him when it comes to filmmaking, which is again why the things he said about Marvel is puzzling, because it's like you're clearly like you think very deeply about things, and you try to meditate on human experiences, but also it's like, how can you not see that like that's not the only way to tell a story?
There's more than one way.
That there's more than one way to do that.
Like, this movie was great, right? But we clearly have put the Avengers on the list of but I think it goes on every list of whether it's like most influential or best or whatever it may be of the decade. It's on there for a reason, because it's a great film just told in a different way.
Yeah. Okay. So let's talk about the score of the film, and there's a lot of credits for the music on this. But let me see if I can pinpoint who is to credit: music producer, music supervisor. I guess the music supervisor for the film was Carmen Merlaner. Because I can't find a specific music by credit on here. But the reason why I'm so excited to talk about the music was because in Scorsese's films, and I noticed this specifically when I was watching Raging Bull, Scorsese's use of music in a film is very strategic. In fact, I don't know if I found anybody who's better at him than using it strategically, where his choice of when to use music and when not to use music. So for instance, when it came to the whole sequence of Frank killing Jimmy, for like 20 minutes, there wasn't a stitch of music in the film.
Yeah.
There was nothing. There was just the actual action happening on the screen. And when I say action, it wasn't even action. It was just Frank walking around for like 20 or 30 minutes, and having conversations with like multiple people. There wasn't a stitch of music. So it creates this like, and because of everything that sort of preceded it, it creates this like, something's coming.
And I think music in that scene would have changed how you felt about, or how he felt about what he was about to do, and you have to feel that too, right? Yeah. So music would have maybe made it seem a little bit more lighthearted, or maybe like more dramatic music would have made it seem a bit exaggerated. But the absence of music in that particular scene made you feel like, because if you're him, right? And I know for myself, whenever I'm in my mind trying to make a decision, like a big decision, important decision, when I'm driving in the car, I'm not listening to any music. I'm not listening to music on my headphones. Like, I need silence to think and make sure I'm making the right decisions. And that's what Frank had to do, right? He's like, do I kill, my really good friend? How do I get myself out of this situation that I've been forced into? So this scene is very realistic to how most people would make these types of decisions.
Yeah,
right?
and the music sometimes allows you as a way out, meaning that it's something to distract you from the awkwardness that is the moment. Mm-hmm. So for instance, as Frank's talking, and as like, so even when he's talking to Russell, right, about, hey, I want you to go do a thing. The absence of the absence of music in that moment, you have no, as the viewer, you have nowhere else to go. You can't run and hide anywhere. You're having to like, wait, what, is he saying what I think he's saying?
Yeah.
Wait, is he going to make him do that?
Like, wait, is Frank going to do it?
There's
like, he has to
nowhere
do it today
for you to go as
no
the audience. There's no place for you to run and hide. There's nothing to distract you. All there is the thought that keeps circulating in your head of, fuck, he's got to go kill him.
Yeah, and then you feel for Frank, like you're empathetic. It's like, wow, he has to kill his friend. Like, how does he get out of this moment? Is he going to do it? Is he not going to do it? And there being nothing else there but thought, you know, because there's no music, it really forces you to like be in that moment in this film.
Absolutely.
That was one of the most intense parts of the movie. Like the whole time, not only are you wondering how he's going to get out of it, like you're also kind of thinking in your mind, like, how would I get out of this? How would I handle this situation? What would I do? You know?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that was like the desired effect of the film, was to put you in that same exact mind frame of fuck, like what would I do in this situation? How would I handle this? Right? Like it leaves it up to the viewer. That's what I think some of the best filmmakers do is don't, and maybe I think this is the biggest difference from like the Marvel movies and like what Scorsese does. Scorsese trusts his audience to draw their own conclusions, to make their own mind up about whatever it is the thing. Marvel does steer you towards like, hey, this is the thing that I want you to feel, you know?
Yeah.
And I think that's the biggest difference, right? But that's what Scorsese does so fucking well. Again, it's a lot of the filmmakers that I just see as like being like the best. They trust their audiences to make their own decisions as far as the material goes. They don't try to put anything. I mean, they do in certain areas try to, you know, signify like, hey, here's where I'm going with this thing. But more often than not, like Nolan, my favorite director, his movies are so fucking complicated that it's just like, of course he just trusts his audience to be like, hey, you decide.
And in this movie, like I think that is most highlighted when Russell basically tells Frank like, hey, I'm gonna need you to kill Jimmy, right? And you have to be the one to do it. And then and Frank is laying in bed at night and he's like laying next to the phone, right? And the audience then has to watch that scene and decide for themselves, like, would I have picked up that phone and called Jimmy?
Exactly.
Would I not have picked up? Like, what would I have done?
Yeah.
So it's really leaving it up to you, and you know, who knows? Like, and a lot of people would go in different directions in that particular moment.
Yeah. And I think that's the whole intent with all that stuff is to really make it so that there's no clear one way or another. But all right. That was our press play on The Irishman. If you haven't watched it yet, please hit that press play button and check The Irishman out now on Netflix. Fantastic film. But just remember, pee beforehand.
Woo!
If you have to eat something, maybe don't eat it during, because you probably get around to needing to take a shit afterwards.
Yeah, and
during
fortunately, this is on Netflix, so you can always hit the pause button. But this movie is best watched in one sitting.
Yeah.
So come prepared. Use the bathroom. Don't eat Indian food, because if you're like me, that'll fuck you up.
Yeah.
Also, don't drink any dairy, cheese, sour cream. Chocolate.
One end well. Yeah. Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, that's the show for today. And let us know. Drop down in the comment section and let us know how you feel about the Irishman. Do you think it's a great film, bad film? Do you think Scorsese justified his reasoning for criticizing the Marvel films, or do you think it was completely unfounded and this was proof of it? Either way, let us know what you think. Jump in the comment section below. With that being said, we have reached another conclusion to another wonderful Fade podcast.